You know that feeling where there's just so much happening that you're not sure which way is up? You're a little bit panicky, you're certain you're about to go under, but all you really needed was someone to grab your hand and say, hey, just put your feet down. You can stand up. Well, that's what this space is for. Welcome to Get a Grip with Dr. Gauri Bahari, where we flip the frame and we find our footing. Hey there, everyone. We are back for another episode of Get a Grip with Dr. Gauri Bahari. And if you were here for the kickoff, you know that there are just some awesome nuggets buried in every one of these conversations, and you got to really dig in and listen to them. And today, we've got a great one that is actually listener submitted. So when we were talking about having this podcast, someone reached out to me and actually sent a suggestion of a situation that she wanted to have Dr. Gauri Bahari peel apart for us and understand, what the heck do I do when this happens? So let me set the stage for everyone. I'm going to read what came in. There's no identifying information here. It is something we've all felt. And I think once you kind of get the feel, you're going to be like, yes, this is a conversation that I need to be here for today. So here we go. I sometimes find myself speaking up on meetings or calls to silence and wondering, is my mic muted? I check, but nope, it's not. Or I'll say something with no response, and then someone else will say it in a different way. And now they get a response or even acknowledgement and sometimes even gratitude that that is such a great idea. And I'm left sitting there with my mouth wide open thinking, I just said that. I'm really not sure if it's because I'm aging or I'm more aware, or maybe it's cultural, or perhaps I'm just more sensitive to it. It's always been there, but now I feel it. Or maybe I'm not communicating or somehow inadvertently making myself small. I really have no idea. Is this something that you guys can talk about? And I mean, as you hear us say that, you're probably like, oh, yeah, I've been there. I did that thing. And then every kind of excuse or reason that she sent in is like, is it this? Is it that? Is it, there's all these variables. So, Gauri, take us through how we deal with the fact that sometimes we just feel invisible, or we feel like our voice is muted, even when it's not, during a work meeting or in a professional setting.
Gosh, it's so hard hearing someone else go through something that I've definitely gone through. And I can tell listening to you that you've gone through it. I'm sure lots of other people have as well. Um, first of all, for the person that sent that in, I'm sorry that you went through that. I'm sorry to anybody who goes through that because it's an awful feeling, feeling invisible, gaslit by your own perception, second guessing yourself. Like, did I say it wrong? Was it dumb? Am I muted? Like, you're sitting there trying to come up with any reason you can that it happened. Um, I think that mute check is your body refusing to accept what just happened. There's no way that someone could just ignore me or not hear me and what just happened. There has to be a better explanation, like I was muted. Kind of like what we did last time, breaking this down into how you feel, how you think you're being perceived, and what actually is happening is how I want to go through this one. Um, so, how you think you're perceived, I think in a lot of those situations, sometimes we can be perceived as being quiet or not contributing. Sometimes that translates to wondering if you're not leadership material or maybe somebody that doesn't have anything valuable to say. And sometimes we can internalize that, like maybe people think I don't belong in this room or at this table or on this Teams call. This is your imposter syndrome coming into play for sure. Again, it's going back to us trying to rationalize what just happened. And it's easier to use internal reasons for why what just happened than trying to think externally. So what's actually happening? Whenever I think about that, I try to go to data. That's probably the sciencey, nerdy side of me. So what does the evidence tell us? Well, data shows us the loudest, most senior, confident people in the room usually dominate the conversation, whether their ideas are the best or anything like that. It's when other people start self-silencing. So think about the times where maybe there's more experienced people in the room and they're being louder than you. You self-silence. You're like, oh, well, maybe they have something important to say and I need to learn, right? Or maybe you're more introverted. And so I even though a lot of people think I'm an extrovert, I'm an extroverted introvert. When there's more dominant, loud people around me, I just get quiet. I go into listening mode. Um, and then sometimes if you're that person that's the only of in that room, you're the subject matter expert and you're the reason you're in that room is because you're the only person who knows X, Y, and Z. Sometimes it's hard to speak up in those rooms when someone's being so loud, because you're the only one of who you are in that room. So a lot of that comes from Adam Grant, the organizational psychologist. He's written lots of books. There's a lot of well documented gender patterns about this in Sheryl Sandberg's and Adam Grant's New York Times op-ed that was titled "Speaking White Female" in 2015. They laid out something really striking. I've remembered this for a long time, which is male executives who speak more than their peers are rated as 10% competent. And then female executives who do the exact same thing are rated 14% less competent. So same behavior, opposite read. I've always found that really interesting. And honestly, I feel that a lot. Um, so ultimately, what I want to say to the person who was vulnerable enough to share their scenario, this is not in your head. What happened, happened. The room is operating most the way that most rooms operate. Um, and if you really want to summarize what happened, there's two injuries that happened, right? First, you were being skipped or ignored. You're feeling invisible. The second injury is what you're telling yourself about what happened. Like I didn't have anything of value to say, or I didn't belong in the room, or some version of those. Um,
You know, when you
okay.
mentioned the gaslighting piece, and I just have to kind of put it in here because this is the whole first, second injury element you're talking about, is our own conversation to ourself ends up being one of the most harmful pieces of this, and I know you're going to get into a little later, like even the amount of time that passes between trying to decipher what that experience was. But we can, this is the prime example of we can be our own worst enemy or our own worst critic in many places and inject our voice onto other people and mirror it in weird ways. So it's a good gut check moment for folks that, hey, you might actually be able to avoid the second injury that you're going to touch on a little bit more than that first one, which is out of your control. You can't really control what other people are doing in that moment, but you can work on your self narrative that you bring to. So what's the second piece to that as we kind of shift into then what are the tools that we have available?
I love that. Before I go into the tools, the biggest thing that I want to make sure everybody knows is the key thing is to not change who you are. You can use these tools without becoming louder, aggressive, interrupting people, making others feel unheard or invisible. That's a pattern that sometimes can get perpetuated if you're not careful. And so, as you go into these tools, just remember to be authentic to yourself and be the kind of leader that you already are and lean into the kind of leader you want to become as you do this because we're all growing. We're all on our journeys to be the best leaders we can be. And I think the best way to do that is to just be yourself. Um, Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, it also made me think when you talked about the SMEs and that being yourself, being so good as a second reminder for this is your language might be different. Like if you are a certain personality, like you were saying, you may in equivalent speak a foreign language to other people in the room. It doesn't mean that you need to learn how to speak fluently in their language. Maybe they need to be taught a little bit about how you speak or what your brain function looks like when it comes out of your mouth and pieces like that. So I think it's a really great reminder that this isn't about using these tools to change who you are or how you approach everything, but also then just being realistic about the environment that's around you. So I'm ready. Let's talk about kind of what is tool number one? What's the first thing that we can look at when we're, I guess, looking at these situations that are coming up for us? And especially after we may have just experienced something negative that's very similar.
Yeah, so the way I would break this down is what you can do before the meeting, what you can do during the meeting. I have tools for during the meeting and what you can do in between meetings. And so I'll just jump right in. Uh, the first one is before the meeting is socialize your idea. So let's say you know that you have a solution to something that you're meeting about, um, and you know you're going to go into that meeting with that idea. The biggest thing is it's really unlikely that people will have a favorable reaction to an idea that you have, especially if it's an outside the box idea that hasn't been tried before, or if they haven't heard that before. Um, and if you think of it this way, it's not because your idea isn't good, it's because a new idea or a novelty is uncomfortable. And a more common way to think about it is change resistance. It's normal human behavior for us to be a little bit resistant to something that's completely new to us right away. Um, Studies have shown that the most successful change makers in history, like Martin Luther King Jr., Sheryl Sandberg, the founders of Warby Parker, have something in common. They socialize their ideas first. They test it 101. And what I mean by that is going to somebody else and saying, "Hey, I want to bring up this idea or this solution. What do you think about it?" This way, that this is an opportunity for you to get input, float it by somebody, but also introduce this to them so that when they hear it during the meeting, this is now the second time they've heard it. They've already warmed up to it. They've already had that initial reaction. Um, what's also really nice about it, and this is kind of my like secret superpower that I use it for, is I love bringing it up to the most skeptical people that I work with because they will give you all the reasons why your idea is not going to work. And it's like a little secret gift to figure out the holes in your idea so that you can work out how you would address those. And then when you're at the meeting, you can bring up those things right away and say, I know this probably wouldn't work because of X, Y, and Z, but this is how we would go about doing them. And what's nice about that is now that person just made your idea stronger, but now you've just gotten their buy-in because now they feel heard by the issues that they would have brought up. Um, so I think really socializing your idea before you even bring it about only helps you, even if when you socialize it before the meeting, someone's negative about it. Those are just little tiny gifts from the universe saying, "Here, how do I make this better for tomorrow?"
And anyone that is in a corporate setting that has got that phishing email that shows up and you're like, do I report this? Do I not? I think of what you just mentioned about giving it to your most like skeptical person is almost like penetration testing, right? You're seeing how deep of a hole can they drill into this idea or this thought that you might have in order to really not necessarily make it foolproof, but it goes back to the language thing. Maybe something just wasn't explained right in a way that they could understand, and you need to have a couple of variations of that on hand. And it's also, I hate to say it, might quiet them if they happen to be in the room when you pitch the idea, because they'll be like, "Oh yeah, we already chatted about this. This is what they're considering," or they're not going to say a word because they're going to be like, "I already told them everything that I can think of to say to them." So there's a double kind of two birds with one stone piece with that, and it's really it can alleviate some of that anxiety too before going into a larger room. So you've done this little kind of pre-work, you've socialized your idea. We're getting into the moment. Maybe it's a virtual meeting, maybe you're physically at a table, and all of a sudden it feels like the button's on again, like here we go again. Now what do we do? So even if we can't necessarily avoid it in the first place and it's starting to have a repetitive cycle, what are things to remember in that moment?
I that is exactly where I was going to go next. It goes back to the first injury is being ignored in the first place. The second injury is what you do about it. This one is where I would reclaim your idea, but don't react. So when someone says your idea or the thing that you were saying already 5 minutes later, don't stew silently. Don't call them out aggressively. Instead, reclaim it. And this looks like saying something like, "Yes, that was exactly the point I was making before. So glad it's resonating with you. To build on it, I would add XYZ." And the reason why that works is because it puts your name back on the idea without making the other person wrong, right? We don't want to do to others what others do unto us. It treats them as agreeing with you, not stealing from you, because we are better as a team moving change forward than we are independently. And to build on it buys you airtime, and that's where your credit will compound. Now, this is your stage now to add why you had that idea. Um, one of the best things that I've ever heard was from journalist Jessica Bennett, where she said, this is where you can say something like, "Hey, you did a nice job of explaining my point. Let me elaborate." Same energy. I really like doing yeah, that's what I was saying too. So glad it's resonating with both of us. That's really helpful. It's one of those moves that feels really uncomfortable the first time you do it, but it becomes normal the third time you do it. So when you first do it, there's going to be a lot of internal signs being like, don't do it, don't do it. What if somebody thinks badly of me? What if I make this worse? What if they still ignore me? Get past that and do it the first time, do it a second time, do it a third time. After that, it'll be your normal. That's it.
Well, and along with that, if it's an action item, maybe you've proposed starting to work on something and someone else now has the momentum for it. Being able to say, "I'd love to collaborate on that." Like, "Hey, yeah, exactly kind of what I was thinking. Can we chat afterwards?" And because this is the great pull yourself out of yourself for a second and look at it from the outside. Maybe they do have the same exact idea and they had it separately and you gave them an opening. They're like, "Hey, Gory just kind of opened the doors to this. Let me come in and reinforce it." So that not applying this, "Oh, they're stealing my idea," or "they're just more trusted," or any of those pieces, but going, "Couldn't we be so much better as a team if we looked at this?" Or they'll be more successful if my perspective or my experience or expertise in this becomes a part of that conversation. So I think it's a appropriate time for a little bit of group think potentially when you start to see some of that happening. But you mentioned there's kind of a part two for the in the moment kind of piece to things. So beyond the reclaim without reacting, what else should we consider?
The next thing is amplifying. So what that is basically where you find other allies or and it doesn't have to be in advance. It could just be in that moment. Actually, the what you just described about collaborating is an example of amplification. So when someone makes a key point, being able to repeat it and credit that person by name, saying, I want to come back to what Natalie just said about this because this is a really important point because of X, Y, and Z. The reason why that works is because repetition forces the room to actually hear the idea. It's really hard to ignore something twice or three times. Crediting by name locks the attribution, right? Now this idea belongs to a person, not to the air. So it has a face tied to it. And then third, every repetition is another exposure. By the time you get that third repeat, you've hit the threshold where the room can start to absorb it. I use the word ally. There's two big things I want to talk about there. One is you don't need alliance. You don't need like a group of people to do this for you. You just need one person. Find a trusted colleague to make the deal. If I say something and the room skips it, can you repeat it back with my name? I'll do the same for you. I think that's really critical because I think it shows someone else in the room who might be going through something that you're going through that, hey, you hear them too. And I think it can start changing that culture. People think you have to change a culture by making really big, sweeping changes with big groups of people. Culture changes start on a very micro level, and doing this person to person can make a really big difference. Um, the second big thing to point out is, usually when you're in a room, sometimes you're in the room and you're the most junior, but sometimes you're not. You're in the middle. There's people who are more senior to you and there's people more junior. Amplify the junior person or amplify the quiet specialist. Amplify anybody else that needs to be amplified. Just like we are feeling that way, the chances are other people are feeling that way. And the best way to create that cultural change is to start being part of that change in front of everyone. Redistribute the power of the room. The more people doing this, the more the meeting culture will shift, the more the company culture will shift. Now, everybody will have a voice at the table, not just the loudest ones, because you're part of giving a voice to the people who can't get a chance to have a voice.
Well, and it's funny because when you think about if it's happening to me, odds are in a 100-person group, it's happening to other people as well. And if we're not talking about it, or at least thinking of how can we change that environment, then it's going to keep happening in so many ways because it's just been deemed acceptable at that point. There's a book, and I can't remember the title of it. I'll pop it in the show notes for this, but it was the same type of thing, but based on different races and ethnicities that sit at the table and the same exact experience, not only the gender gap, but just the homogeny gap. So if you're a very specific kind of voice that's been silenced over time or oppressed over time, and now you're trying to speak up again, if you're listening and you watch it happen, you can even facilitate that and say, "Oh, Jenny, Sarah just said that. Like, have you two talked to each other? Is there something we could explore here? And that doesn't have to be a leader that does that. That can just be an interested party that picks up on this thing. And active listening in those instances can be so powerful. So even if your mic is muted, there's still action you can potentially be doing in that moment as you listen to the rest of the dialogue around you. So, great. It's awesome if we can change the culture, right? Really, really good stuff if we're able to be a part of that and we're able to take these little steps and make these changes as they happen. But that meeting ends. Maybe things stick, maybe they don't. How do we reinforce what we're looking for? How do we determine, hey, I'm never going to be heard here? Maybe this isn't the space that I want to be in. Like, what does that after effect look like, especially short term and long term?
Well, I think before we get to that, I actually think there's one more tool to that people can use, which is changing the format. A lot of times people think that the people hosting or leading the meeting are the only ones making the decisions about how the format can be, but we can change the format as being attendees of the meeting, right? People think that you can't change the culture of a meeting just because of that, but you totally can. I'll bring it back to Adam Grant again. I'm kind of realizing I might be a fan. But he argues that traditional brainstorming meetings are broken. And the reason for that is because whoever is the loudest, most confident, or most senior dominates. And, they're the ones that are bringing up all the ideas and things like that. And that's not really brainstorming. So his fix is something called brain writing. So instead of going around the room verbally, everyone writes their ideas down independently first and then they share them. And what this does is it strips out the dominance dynamics. Now, the shy people have a voice. The loud people can still contribute, but now on equal footing. Everybody gets a chance. There's other versions of this where maybe a leader goes around, every person, "Hey, so and so, you haven't spoken up yet. What do you think?" Or so there's lots of different versions about it. You can do brain writing where you write them down in advance, where everybody gets a chance. That kind of thing. There's so many different ways to do that. So, sending out an agenda in advance and have people do written input, doing a round robin where everybody gets a certain amount of time to give their thoughts, or even saving the last 5 minutes for anyone who didn't get a chance to weigh in. I have mixed feelings about that one because sometimes if somebody felt like they didn't have a voice the whole time, they may have already shut down for the last 5 minutes. So, trying to feel out the culture of what makes sense for that specific meeting, just keep that in mind. But the biggest thing here that I always think about is if meetings are structured to favor the loudest voice, then you're not failing the meeting. The meeting is failing you. Usually you're not the only person in the room that feels that way. That's kind of been the thing that we've been talking about this whole time. Usually there's others too. You're just the one that's willing to name it or at least willing to be like, "Hey, something's not right here. This is not the kind of meeting I want to be a part of." So, just make sure that the last tool would be starting to change the format. And again, micro changes, right? Can I have the agenda? Can we send out the agenda in advance? Hey, so and so hasn't spoken yet. Can we hear from them? Hey, can we save the last few minutes so that we can get input from anybody else that didn't get a chance to speak? So there's lots of options there. Now, to answer your question,
Wait, I have one more thing for that.
yeah.
You got me thinking about so much good stuff, Corey. Well, also, we're different processors, right? And people are often not good in the moment. Like you're dumping information on them or you've got them thinking and now their brain's really going. So even beyond that moment, I think it's a great reminder to us that we don't need to do a meeting every 3 days on the same topic or even every week. Like give people some time to digest, but give them the feedback loop. So if they're a writer, if they like to, as you mentioned, write things down, when do they need to get that feedback to you? What should it include? Here's how to reach out. Here's when I'm available to talk about this more. And that may even if you've been a voice that tried to speak up and couldn't, give you another chance in a more kind of intimate setting to have that discussion as well. So not only offering that, but then taking advantage when it is offered, because it's not enough people do that. Not enough people do that follow up or just say, let me take that 15 minutes and really pick your brain a little bit more now that I've had time to grasp what all we were discussing in that moment. So really great reminder that it's so much more than just like the 10-minute interaction that sometimes these things happen during.
You bring up a really good point, actually. I used to, one of my roles at VA, I used to run these meetings across with leaders across 3 different states. And I would always ask people for feedback or even put it in the, like, put any feedback in the chat to improve things. Well, one year, my administrative counterpart and I decided to send out a questionnaire, and we decided to send it out with anonymous. Like, you could respond to it. We wouldn't know anything about you. We would probably know what specialty and maybe even what region you're from, but we wouldn't know the specific hospital you were at or anything like that. And it's so funny, for years, we were making changes based on what the loudest people in the room would give us feedback on. And when we sent out the questionnaire, we had, 80 to 100 responses. And it was so much more enlightening because we had so many people comment on the little things that we would do just because we enjoyed doing them and they weren't really standard part of meetings, but they would sometimes occur. And we had people giving us feedback on other things. And it was very eye-opening that for so long I wasn't giving the quieter people a chance to speak up and give their thoughts, and having an anonymous place to give me feedback on how we ran meetings, um, really gave me back way more feedback than I had had in the previous 3 or 4 years. We implemented a lot of changes based on that feedback we got, and we did another anonymous questionnaire 6 months later, and the number of people who, again, during the 6 months of meetings, that never said anything that they appreciate, we spent the 6 months being like, "Are people happy about these changes? Are they?" Whatever. It was so nice. So many people said, "Thank you for taking my feedback into consideration and actually making a change about it. And thank you for sharing." The other thing we did was we made sure we shared the results of what people had and what we were going to do about it, and the things that we were going to do right away versus the things we were going to wait on. So when we weren't flooding a flood of changes at once. Um, but the biggest feedback we got wasn't just that the changes were good, that people just appreciated having a safe place to give ideas for feedback. And that was really eye opening, to use different formats: written, spoken, anonymous, even having somebody to be able to go to someone else that isn't me. People aren't always comfortable going to the person leading the meeting. They felt comfortable going to my administrative counterpart, even. So that was really something that I think about moving forward. And I hope all of you can learn something from that too.
Yeah, and it's probably the people that hold that space that then get frustrated when others don't hold it for them. So it may be a reinforcement that you're doing great work when you're in that role. And now it's a matter of when the tables turn, how do you navigate that? And are you able to? Because maybe, and that's our final kind of closing point is, what happens if you're not able to really ever feel like my voice has a place here? Or, the culture is just not going to change in a way that makes this something that where I feel comfortable or I want to be a part of that feedback conversation. What do we do in those instances?
You know, I've been reflecting a lot on this for a while now, and you know that because we've talked about it. So yeah, this is the hard part. What do you do if all the things that you've done, right? Let's say you're doing everything right, you're implementing the tools, you're creating a space for others the best you can, you socialize the idea, you reclaim your ideas, you find your ally, and that room doesn't change. The question shifts now. The question isn't what's wrong with how I'm showing up. It's, is this the right room for me? Is this the right table I need to be at? Is this the right organization for me? I've done everything. I've put in the work and nothing's changing. Um, if you're consistently the most invisible person in the room despite doing all the work, that's a data point too. Not every meeting is a meeting worth fighting to be heard in. Sometimes the most strategic move is to find a different table or a different meeting. Sometimes it's, even better to just build your own meeting or your own table or your own organization. But this is really a good time to reflect on why you're at that table, what your goals are for being at that table. Does that table even meet your goals or meet you halfway towards those goals? And is it time to make a change? Or if it's not, what are you going to do in the meantime until it's time to make a change? And how will you know it's time to make a change?
And I know we'll talk about it more in the future. We've got other podcasts that touch on these kind of things, but this isn't something that happens overnight, right? It takes a little bit of work, it takes a little bit of time. A lot of these things are 6-month planning processes. So, if you're like, okay, I have been the invisible voice for a year and nothing's really changing, I've tried all those things. We're not encouraging you to pick up and turn in your resignation tomorrow and find a new table or find a new place. We're just saying it's something to listen to. It's something to tap into, to be aware of, and something to consider if you do look for a new table, that you don't go with what you're just aware of or comfortable with or that feels familiar, because familiar is not what's serving you in this moment. And so there might be a new sense of discomfort to explore, but the reward for that may really be worth it when it's all said and done. So, Gori, any last thoughts as we wrap up this second episode of Get a Grip with Dr. Gauri Bahari before we send folks off to start to put some of these things in practice themselves?
I think the biggest thing is going back to just being your authentic self. These are all tools to help you. These are not ways to change who you are at your core. And kind of going back to what we talked about last time, trust yourself. All the experiences that you've had, all the struggles that you've had, all the uncomfortable moments brought you here. You have the skill set you need to navigate these difficult things. You just need to pull from within and navigate. So all we're doing is holding your hand and giving you some more organized ways to do it, but you've got it. We all have it in us. We know how to handle these. I'm sure none of the things I said today were new to anyone.
No, but they're great reminders. And it also just goes to show we've all been in those spaces too. That's the whole point of this, is that we're trying to just flip your perspective a little bit, help us all get footing. Good reminders for all of us as we go through these processes. If you found today's episode helpful, useful, know that this is the way we want to take submissions to find out what different topics you want us to cover and break down. So send us your ideas, comment on this episode, give us a like, give us a follow, and make sure that you tune back in for the next episode of Get a Grip with Dr. Gauri Bahari, where we'll have another kind of tricky, murky, icky, professional, personal intersection component that makes us all go, oh God, how am I ever going to manage this? But we're going to talk about the tools. We'll find the way through and we'll get you steady again. So, Gauri, thanks for joining us today for this great conversation. And thank you to the listener who sent in your situation. We hope you found this helpful.